Welcome to the Heatio podcast, where over the next few weeks, months and years, hopefully, we'll be talking to you about ways in which you can reduce your energy bills. We'll be looking at ways in which you can be more sustainable and ultimately reduce your carbon footprint. Today, we'll be focused on heat pumps, and we are actually joined by a heat pump expert, Graham Hendra, who is the author of the book 50 Things You Need to Know About Heat Pumps. Welcome to the show, Graham.
Thanks for having me.
And I believe a bit long journey up today from Southampton.
Yes, it's a bit of a trek, but lovely weather for it.
Doing your bit for the carbon footprint as well.
Yes, yes. We won't discuss the car.
Exactly. So Graham is actually the author of 50 Things You Need to Know About Heat Pump Systems, which I believe is available on the Amazon store.
Yes.
So feel free to get your copy.
It's a riveting read.
How many have you sold so far?
Bizarrely, nearly 1,000.
So there's 1,000 of us out there somewhere in the world.
Yeah, it's gone better than I planned.
Excellent.
So let me start first off with the what is a heat pump?
Yes, please.
So essentially, all a heat pump is a modern boiler. So if you think for the last 30, 40, 50 years, you've had a gas boiler or an oil boiler or something like that, and the next generation of boilers are renewable. So essentially, a heat pump is a renewable boiler. So what they're going to do is take out your fossil fuel system and replace it with a heating system which is much more or has much smaller impact on the environment, much more sustainable, and so on. So there's nothing magic, there's nothing amazing. It just heats your house using same old radiators and pipes and cylinders, but not by burning something in your house. It's actually using renewable electricity to drive. So that's basically what they are.
So they're not a magic box and they don't contain black magic or anything like that. They're just a very simple system. Do we come across them in our day-to-day lives? Yeah,
I mean, I was born in 1970. Maybe my parents had a good job, but we had a fridge freezer.
Okay.
And a fridge freezer is a heat pump. Now, you hear a lot of people getting a little bit excited about the difference between a fridge and a heat pump, but I always think about it like this. When you bought your freezer, you bought a machine that when you opened the door, inside it was lovely and cold and you could put your pizza in or your chicken, and everybody knows if you leave it in there long enough, the heat gets sucked out of it, disappears somewhere, and you end up with frozen food. Now, as a heat pump engineer, the only difference is I spend my time hanging out down the back of your fridge. So the back of your fridge is the hot bit. That's where the heat comes out. So actually, your fridge is sucking the heat out of your chicken or your pizza or whatever you stuck in there, in the little tubes that you see going backwards and forwards. If you defrost it regularly, you can see the little tubes. Yeah. And if you defrost it with a carving knife, you get to see the refrigerant leak out and a fridge engineer fairly shortly afterwards. So essentially, that fluid inside those pipes is very, very cold. It sucks the heat out of the air and the chicken and so on. And we have a pump on the back. And if you listen very carefully to your fridge, you can hear a humming sound. And the humming sound is just a pump. We like to keep the cost up, so we call it a compressor. It's a pump. So basically, that's pumping the refrigerant around. So once it's full of heat, we then push it through this compressor and we wring the heat out of it by compressing it. And most of us don't know this, but the heat is pouring off the back of your freezer. So if you go down the back and hang out there where I go, there is heat pouring off that funny black coil off the back of your freezer. So you're actually heating your kitchen with turkey power. Nice. You're taking a little bit of heat out of your food, pumping it around and warming your kitchen up. Now, so basically, if I was trying to sell that as a heat pump guy, I would tell you that you've got a turkey to kitchen heat pump. and that's what it is. So when people say to me it's a new technology and so on, I don't remember not having a fridge or a freezer. They've been around forever as far as I'm concerned. And I always say to people, it's not new and it's a system you understand. And one of the things that is worth pondering before you go for this technology is, when did you last have a maintenance on your fridge freezer? When did it last break down? It just sits there, whirring away constantly. We changed ours because we didn't like the colour of it. So that's what it's doing. Now, essentially pumping heat from one place to the other, from your food into the kitchen. So what we're going to do with an air source heat pump is exactly the same process, but instead of having a load of freezers and so on, what we do is we put the cold bit, the bit with all the refrigerant running around, that's now going to go in your garden. So we're going to cool the air in your garden and suck heat out of the air in the garden. If you think about your freezer, it plods along at minus 25 degrees C every day of the year, constantly. It's very rarely minus 25 degrees outside. So we can suck the heat out of the air, even if it's minus 5, minus 10. There's still some heat left. We then use a bigger compressor, which again sits outside just to keep it all neat. And instead of having a black coil sat on the kitchen wall to warm the kitchen, which would look a bit weird, all we do is use a heat exchanger and we drizzle water over it. So once the water's drizzled over that lovely warm coil, you end up with a bucket full of hot water, which we pump around the house through your radiators. That, unfortunately, is all there is to it. It really isn't very clever.
Why do we care how a heat pump works? So as you say, when you go and buy a fridge, your questions are going to be, will it fit into that space? What color is it? Why do we care how a heat pump works? I know you're into your cars, so if you were buying a car has a similar system built into it to a heat pump system, and I've been asked in the past, how can a heat pump produce heat when it's that cold outside? So the fridge analogy I get, but in that scenario, if your car is outside and you get into it and it's -2 or -3, you don't panic that you're going to get enough heat out of that system.
No.
And we also, when we're buying a car, we look at the color, we look at how it drives, we might look at the miles per gallon. We don't look at how it works. We don't ask somebody to explain to us the refrigeration cycle. Right? So why do we care so much for heat pump systems?
I honestly don't know. It blows me away. I mean, I know how they work. It's my job. I'm a bit obsessed with the stupid things. But when I bought my car, they told me bizarrely the engine's in the back. I'm not sure why some idiot put it in the back. But I bought it because I really like the Alcantara seats. And I don't know how it all works, but I know it does. And I got in and it starts and it makes a noise and it goes. And if I'd have said to the salesman, can you go into the intricacies of the braking system with me and who made the brake pads and what brand of hydraulic fluid has it got? They'd look at me like I had two heads and go, it's a car. Do you want it or not? And I actually genuinely believe that most of the problem is us idiots. I mean, people like me actually think this is interesting. So we go, let me tell you, you can imagine going to a bar and there's all these interesting people and I'm at the end of the bar and you go, would you like me to tell you the global warming potential of the refrigerant in your heat pump? And they go, no, absolutely not. But because we as an industry think it's interesting and push that message, so let me explain everything to you and so on, people feel they need to know it. If my boiler broke down at home and I called a plumber in, the plumber, he or she would come in, have a quick look around the house, say, look, this is the boiler I like, from Worcester Bosch or Valent or whoever. It fits on the wall where your old one did. It kind of looks nice and white and it's going to work. And he's in there for half an hour, and it doesn't explain to you how the whole thing works. You just go, it's a boiler, it works.
But is that the same? Are we getting to the same point with it then? That we don't ask how a boiler works when it breaks down. We know they work. We know they heat our home. We know they give us hot water. But we never ask that question around how do they work. Talking to me about the combustion cycle of a boiler and how this. So does that come to the next question then? Is it because if we are saying to people that a heat pump is essentially exactly the same as a boiler and it's a replacement to a boiler, and then they go, okay, that's fine. I can accept that. You're going to heat my radiators. You're going to heat my hot water in a similar way. So how much is it going to cost me? Oh, it's going to cost you anywhere between £7,000 to £13,000 to have the installation. I would imagine when I'm comparing that to the cost of a boiler, which might be £1,500 to £3,000. If I was in that situation, I'm probably going to want to know why.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that might be one of the points. Again, you probably want to cut this bit out, but if you think about what do I do for a living? So I turn up at your house and I say, don't have a gas boiler. Let's be sustainable. Let's reduce our carbon footprint. Let's save the penguins and the polar bears. And I'm going to sell you this other boiler, this better boiler for the environment. You go, okay, what's better about it? Because my boiler heats the house. And you go, yeah, we heat the house. And it heats the hot water. Yeah, we do that too. Is it cheaper? No, it's a lot more expensive to buy. Okay. Is it cheaper to run? A little bit. And you kind of look at all the options and go, I now need to defend myself and explain to you in great detail that what I'm selling you is good, honest. And we used to have a joke when I first started that I wonder how easy it would be if people really wanted them. You know, people want a boiler. I can assure you when your boiler breaks down, there's nothing more on your mind of getting home, the house is cold, you're not going to have a shower tomorrow morning, you know, causes all sorts of strife in the house. But we're going in with this kind of weird message. And also there is an arrogance in heat pumps. I thought it had died, but so when I started, there was very much we are geniuses. You are all idiots. The entire heating industry are idiots. We are the only people who know what we're doing. And we will educate you in the dark art of heat pumpery. And then it dawned on me that we had to sell some stuff. So we cut that and it died. And worryingly, it's back. And it's creeping in of people going, I am an expert and you need me. And you go, I get that. It's wonderful that you're an expert. But we need thousands of people doing this. If you want to do tens of thousands of these units, it's fine. It's great to be an expert and have this amazing sort of understanding and go through the whole system with someone and explain for a day how it works. If you're only doing one a week and that's all you want to do.
But is that a point around if you are spending, let's say the upper levels of those estimates, £7,000 to £13,000 on these systems, and then you have so somebody has to make a conscious decision to make this based on the relatively minimal savings that they could make against, say, natural gas. The savings are there, I guess, against electricity, direct electric heating, oil heating. Yeah. But for natural gas, if we're saying, natural gas is 80% of homes in the UK are on gas, 23 million boilers. So that's the market that we've got to break. And the savings, as it stands at the moment, are relatively minimal. If you spend the higher levels of that, I'm assuming if you're saying you're going to spend £7,000 on installation, you're not doing the level of upgrades. So are you having to go to the £13,000 upgrading all the radiators, pipe work, new hot water systems? Is it to that kind of level in order for you to get the minimal savings?
I have always said the quality of the installation is inversely proportional to the cost. Okay. Because everybody who moans on the internet about a bad system, and I understand why they moan. You spent a lot of money in it. It doesn't. Maybe it works, but it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do. They all start with my horror £20,000 installation, and my first question is, why on earth did you pay £20,000? Yeah, that is insane. Unless your house is enormous, that is insane. So the cost you're paying is not a guarantor of quality. But I think you have to, I think the secret with anything is when you're speaking to your installer, ask other people if they're any good, have they had good experiences. If I was paying £10,000 for my system at home, I'd say I probably want to talk to one of your previous customers. It's a lot of money. I could buy a boiler for £3,000. Okay, it makes me a bit of a climate pariah, but £7,000's a holiday to Greece. So I would want to speak to people. Did you have a good experience? I think it's really, really odd that homeowners will spend enormous amounts of money with someone they've really never met before. And when you speak to them, they go, well, the bloke didn't really know what he was talking about when he turned up as well. And I'm screaming at the computer going, why did you give this guy the money? Yeah. They didn't know, as far as I know, nobody in our industry is kind of like a pressure seller. No one's going in there and going, if you that old scam of if you sign up today, I'll ring my boss and get 30% off the price. I don't believe anyone's doing that yet. Give it time. So there's no pressure. You've got time to think about it. I would want to get a little bit of feedback. And in this day and age, with things like this sort of podcast and so on, you get a little bit of information. You can find out if people are good. You can go on forums and go, I'm using this guy. Is he any good? You could speak to your manufacturer as well and ask them. I mean, one of the things I advise people, a lot of what I do is getting involved with homeowners who want advice. They say, I've got 5 different quotes. I don't know what to do. They're all different. I've been given loads of different information, and I'm in a bit of a unique position because I don't sell any units. I just sell information. So I kind of go, look, this is the real numbers that you need to be looking at. And I always say to people, if you're trying to decide between one machine and another machine and so on, or one contractor and another, give them a ring out of the blue and ring them up and say, my heat pump's broken down. I've got a fault code A1. And see how quickly they answer the phone. If you are there on Christmas Eve and you can't get anyone to answer the phone, you've got a dreadful system as far as you're concerned. And if you can get the information quickly, that is the best system. And I think that for me, will they answer the phone? Will they call you back at a weekend? Will they text you back and so on? Yeah, you should be demanding a decent level of service because you're paying a lot of money.
Yeah, so you mentioned there we could go out and you can speak to these engineers, you can speak to their previous customers, you can text them on a weekend, seeing if they respond. So we've got I think they call it the skills gap of heat pump engineers in the UK. But I think there's an argument to say that these questions and the answers to these questions are directly linked to the fact that we've got such few installers in the UK, which ultimately leads to those installers having the opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to answer my phone on the weekend. I'm going to chase this up because if we start with that first, the second question, how much do they cost? If the industry average is £7,000 to £13,000, bear in mind that we're going to touch on the boiler upgrade scheme next. That does bring that down significantly with a £5,000 grant towards it. But if we're talking about £7,000 to £13,000, you're talking about very few. A small percentage of the population being able to afford that, or even if they could afford it, choosing to do it in comparison to a gas boiler.
Yeah.
So if you're then spending £7,000 to £13,000 on this system, your next question would logically be, I want to understand intrinsically how this system works and how it's going to perform in my home, because this is a very emotive purchase. This is the thing that's going to heat your home on Christmas Day, as you mentioned. It's going to produce your hot water for your family, and you're making this decision to put this in your house. The likelihood is you haven't sat around the dining table with your family and you've all had a round table vote that this is the decision you're going to make. Somebody in that family is making that decision and going to put this in. So if that was taken out of the equation, if cost was taken out of the equation and it was simply a direct replacement for the boiler and the capital cost of that system was similar to that of a boiler, do you think the amount of people that would want to know as much as they currently do about heat pumps would decrease?
Yes. I think if you get home tonight, the boiler's gone bang, it doesn't work, you call your friendly plumber who turns up and says, look, it's dead, it's done, it needs replacing. If the plumber says to you, you can have the new green boiler system, which they call a heat pump, or you can have this sort of retro, the same sort of thing you've had before, pretty much the same cost, pretty much the same run cost. Why wouldn't you go green? You go, all right, the new green. I would have called them green boilers, but some idiot called them heat pumps. I don't even know if I want my heat pumping, but anyhow, that's what they're called. And you kind of go, I think I'll go for the green boiler. And then there's something that I have this imaginary world in my head. Maybe it's from spending too much time hanging out the back of fridges, but I imagine a scenario. I've just spent 10 grand on a heating system and I go to the pub with my mates tonight and we're all sitting about and I go, guys, I just spent 10 grand on a heating system. And obviously they go, are you mental? The heating systems are 3.5 grand. And now I'm on the back foot. So I need to tell them a reason why I've done this. And our industry, if it has one failing, has sort of forgotten that. And there is no punchline. So you don't go, I've got X, Y, and Z reasons. I haven't got the answers either. But I refer everything to cars. If you think about 15 years ago, if you'd said you bought an electric car, people would go, are you mental? They're awful. They're all milk floats. And then Tesla turned up. And Tesla produced this machine, which is much faster than your petrol engine car. So you turn up to the pub and go, I bought an electric car. And they go, oh, a milk float. And you go, yeah, it does 0 to 60 faster than your car. And they go, oh, look, what a load of rubbish. And then you go out to the car park and you drive one and you think, blimey, this thing's astonishing. So you've given them the message. And now when you go to the pub and go, I bought a Tesla, people go, God, they're rapid, they're amazing. But we have failed completely to give our industry those things. Why did you buy a heat pump? I've been doing this for quite a long time, 13 years, and I do it because I love them. But that isn't a great reason. So I actually think that half the reason we have to explain ourselves is I feel I have to try and make you love them too.
Yeah.
And
you've got to justify the cost at that time as well.
And if you just went, it's a green boiler, and it reduces your carbon emissions by 20% or 30% and so on, people go, fantastic, I'm saving a ton or a ton and a half or whatever. I'm down the pub going, well, you're the evil guy with your gas boiler. You get that now with cars. People go, you bought a petrol engine car, did you? Oh, right. Are you going on a seal culling holiday this year as well? And you go, no, I just like petrol. And they go, well, get with the program. And I think now it's something of the order, it's above 10% of cars now are electric. It's really gaining traction. But it did that by the cost not being significantly higher. It had a reason to go for it. Looks like a car, goes like a car.
What was that cost? We saw petrol prices obviously increasing, and if we were to look at the comparison in heating, we've got we have them for as long as I can remember been very reliant on cheap gas to the point where gas was kept cheaper by putting costs onto electric to offset it. So if we've and we saw in the electric car industry, we've seen fuel prices go up. So that's incentivized people to move to electric. Now, in the heat pump world, when you're sat there with a gas boiler, gas prices have gone up, but electricity prices have gone up in line with them. So there's still not a driver there to do it. Do you think if we just start to see those prices, the electricity prices start to come down, gas prices continue to go up, do you think we will still get these same questions? We may get the one of how much does it cost, but if the answer to that question was this, it's the equivalent of your boiler.
Yeah, but there's a lot of talk about this on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of my life on LinkedIn, and there's this: if the government subsidise gas like they subsidise electricity like they subsidise gas. I don't know what the figures are, but let's argue that it's 2 pence. They put 2 pence a kilowatt hour on gas. Gas is about 8p. And they're going to shift it over to electricity to help everybody. Brilliant idea. Well, let's go for that. Grant Shapps isn't going to do that, right? And no politician under the sun is ever going to do that. They're going to tell you they're going to do it, but they're not going to do it. Think about it logically. 83% of the electorate have a gas boiler. He is going to stand on the 9 o'clock news tonight and go, hi, guys. 83% of you've got an increase in run cost of £500 a year because we're going to fund the guys who bought a heat pump. How do you fancy that? Oh, by the way, it's a general election next week. I won't be here next week because I'll have lost my seat. So we're in this vicious cycle. They can't change it.
No.
It would take an incredibly brave politician to do it. But there's loads of people going, if this happened, you go, if cars flew, there wouldn't be any traffic. But that's not going to happen either. So we've got to get real and look at things that are plausible. And I think the secret is if we can focus on getting the overall cost of the installation well away from the 13 grand. 13 grand's fine if you live in an enormous house. That you're not going to get a boiler for 3.5 grand. But in the average 3-bedroom semi, a UK average house, 3-bedroom, 1930 semi, 125 metres squared. That is the stock house. That's the one we've got to work on. Those guys are paying 3.5 grand for a boiler, 7, 8, 9, 10 for a heat pump. As an industry, we have got to focus on 10 grand is just not going to work long term. It's going to be a niche industry until that comes down. I don't know what the difference in cost is in other countries. It's something, there's a lot of data comes out of other countries, but they never give you that sort of data.
Well, I think we can get there if we're talking £7,000 to £13,000 is the average price, and then there's a funding scheme from the government called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme. So everybody that owns a property has the opportunity to get £5,000 towards their installation. So that brings the capital cost down to what we were talking anywhere between £2,000 to £7,000 for the equivalent of the installation. Now, we know at that bottom end, at that £2,000, we're starting to get close to the price of a boiler installation.
Well, that's cheaper than the boiler. Boilers, you'd be lucky to get a boiler put in for £3 grand unless your son's a plumber.
Even if we're talking a kind of straight up combi swap.
I think people kind of go, 10 years ago I had a quote for a combi, it's 1,500 quid. Have you heard of inflation? So I don't think you're going to get a lot of change out of $3,000 unless you're very, very lucky for a boiler. You go rip out, replace, unless it's a really easy install. The boiler alone is about 1,000 quid. Type them in Google, they're about 1,000 quid. So, and there will be someone screaming at the screen right now going, I do it for 2,650 quid, and well done to you.
Yeah.
But if we take the $5,000 off, we should be aiming at the sort of, it's $3,000 from us too. So your choice is boiler A, boiler B, roughly the same cost, $3,000. That's the holy grail. That's where we need to be.
We've seen adverts going out from the likes of British Gas and Octopus Energy now are kind of advertising installations around that price. So are they doing that through pure volume, or are they targeting very specific house types that allow them to get away from having to do maybe the level of upgrades that would result in an installation costing £7,000?
So my understanding is they're going for a particular house type, which makes a lot of sense. Little tiny flats are quite difficult to do. Manor houses are quite difficult to do. So let's scrap them. There's not that many of them. Let's go for the bulk in the middle. So I think they're probably focusing on that kind of 3-bedroom semi-market. I think obviously they've got the purchasing power. And also there's an enormous amount of administration behind what we do, as you know. I mean, currently at last count, there are 82 pages of paperwork to fill in an MCS application to get the $5,000. When you say, why is the unit expensive? You go, because your poor plumber goes home and spends a whole day filling in utterly mindless paperwork. Mm-hmm. He doesn't do that with a boiler. So if you're a huge company like Octopus, this is probably done by a team or a machine or something. So they've deleted all of that process away, which you can only do with volume. I think also they're probably looking at something that's needed doing for a long time. There's been a bit of a, how many bits can I add to the unit? It's kind of like someone's bought out a new widget. Let's stick that on too. Yeah. And you've got this person who's really into heat pumps, and you go, does it make a difference if it's $10,000 or 10.5? Let's throw the kitchen sink at it. But no one's saying, do we really need all that stuff? It's when I was a wholesaler, I thought it was brilliant that you bought all the bits. That's where I made all my money. But now I look at it and go, if we need to get down in price, what can we lose? Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of, I don't want to name particular companies that do it, but you've got to start looking at what is all this stuff.
The bolt-ons.
And I think we need to get rid of a lot of that. And do you really need to change all my radiators?
Well, this is, the next question. Sorry, Joseph, would you mind going to the next question for us? So this is probably a big part of it. When we look at the capital cost of a heat pump installation, mm-hmm. And from my experience looking into this, you've got this kind of mindset of going, before I even turn up at your house, what you've got will not be good enough because you've been running on a boiler at high temperature. Mm-hmm. So if we just take, and I think I've got the figure here, it's something like, so 20% of all gas boilers are system boilers.
With a tank,
So we have a tank.
Yeah.
So if we just look at those first, my understanding is in a lot of cases, the first thing you're walking into that house is going, that tank will not be good enough to go with a heat pump system. So we're talking about walking into the house and taking the existing hot water tank out. And we also automatically, because of the capital cost of the systems, we automatically assume that we're going to have to rip out all the radiators, because if you're spending that much money, you must get the running costs, the savings. Therefore, you've got to have a low temperature system.
Yeah, and so let me address those separately. So you could connect any heat pump to your old cylinder. You could do that. I did it when I moved into my house. I tried everything. The reason I know what you shouldn't do is I've tried the whole lot at home. Many times we've had cold showers and cold house by trying stupid things. So you could connect your heat pump to your old cylinder. But what happens is, because the boiler is designed to run at very, very high temperatures, and we'd like to run heat pumps at lower temperatures, it takes longer to heat the tank. So one of the things we could discuss with you is, if we don't change your cylinder, we can heat it, but it might take 2 or 3 hours with that old cylinder, which is not really what you want to do, because that's 3 hours I can't heat your house. Now, what we should be doing is going, I notice you've got PV system on the roof, so maybe we could use the PV to help us a little bit, which might help with the old cylinder. Or maybe we use a higher temperature heat pump for short periods of time to heat the cylinder. So you don't, the ultimate system, the ultimate ultra high efficiency system has got a brand new cylinder every time. But when I first started, you had to change the cylinder. It took so long to heat the tank, it was impossible. But as the temperature has come up over the years, it's got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. I looked at my system yesterday. I changed my tank yesterday. I'm testing one. My machine's producing water at 65 degrees C, which is nearly boiler temperature. So I could have put a boiler tank in. Would have been mad to do so, but I could have done it. So we should look at your cylinder first before condemning it. I mean, if you've got I've just done my son's house. It's a project I'm doing on LinkedIn called Project Impossible. He had a copper Gled Hill cylinder, which is literally put in September 1972, had the red duvet and so on. I'm sorry, that's going. You just can't use that. It is horrible.
Yeah.
We've done some measuring, and actually 40% of the heat we chuck in that cylinder comes out as hot water. The rest heats the house. No one would use that on a heat pump.
Yeah.
But if you've got a lovely sort of modern pressurized cylinder, there is a possibility we could use it. So let's at least explore that, especially if we're going high temperature. When it comes to radiators, it's quite an interesting sort of development in this has come in. So the ultimate heat pumps are more efficient if you run them at lower temperatures. So if I can run them at 35 or 40 degrees C, you get a really good run cost. And that's what the dream is. And they all talk about this thing called COP, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. It drives me mad. It's basically efficiency. But we're obsessed with, let's get the very, very, very best performance out of the unit, but let's not ask the customer if that's what they want. We're just going to go super high efficiency. And one of the things that's really opened my eyes of doing my son's system is, so his is absolutely covered in heat meters so that we can use it as a test case. And what we found is he only runs the heating for 2 hours a day because he hasn't got any money. So he turns the boiler on, runs it for an hour in the morning, turns it off all day, comes home to a cold house, turns it on for an hour, and then turns it off again. And you go, that's not how you should run a heating system. He goes, I don't care. I haven't got any money. And I've turned up as an idiot and said, we're going to put a heat pump in and we're going to run it 24 hours a day. And he rings me up and says, because it costs a fortune. I went, yeah, I'm heating it for 22 hours longer than you used to. And he said, can I run it like a boiler? And of course you can. Now, if you run it like a boiler for 2 hours a day, it's going to not be the peak efficiency, but it only runs for a very short period. So who cares?
Well, would the argument to that then be, your heat pump purist, as you mentioned, the person who's going to walk into your house and say, I'm going to upgrade all your radiators, I'm ripping that hot water cylinder out. But this is why the installation costs £13,000, £7,000, because we're going to do all this work. So therefore, you have to run it in this particular way and leave it on for such long periods of time to maximize your savings and your efficiency if you ran your boiler system in the same way before.
Yes, and I think that's something that we as an industry are dreadful at doing. What we should do first thing is, congratulations on deciding to take the green route. Well done, we're going down this green route. Right, before we start anything, before you get any tape measures out, how do you heat your house now? No one asks that. No. And they say, I only run it for 2 hours a day. You go, okay, well, we can do that with a heat pump too. And it's very different. The makeup of the system is very different. So, example, in my son's house, we've managed to take all the data for the last 5 months. And because he runs the radiators for short periods of time, they start cold, they come up to temperature over a period of time, and then he turns them off. And the actual average radiator temperature when the system's running, not when the over the whole day, but just when the system's running, his radiators average 50 degrees C because they're stone cold at the beginning and it takes them a while to warm up, and the house is cold, so you never really get up to temperature very quickly. Well, I can do 50 degrees C with a heat pump easily. So I said to him, well, we'll just run the heat pump at 50 degrees C or 55, and it will do just what your boiler does, and it will run for 2 hours a day, and the total sum of radiators changed in the house is none. And it brings me to another thing that you think about a little bit when you ask how they use the system. They have a spare bedroom, which no one lives in, so they don't heat it. It doesn't even matter if it's got a radiator. Me going in there and insisting he changes the radiator in a room he doesn't even go in is insanity. But that's what we as an industry have always done. And I did it too. You know, I'm going there and do all the calcs. Maybe the better thing to do would be go, look, I'll tell you what we're going to do, especially in that bedroom. We're not going to touch that bedroom because you don't heat it. And you seem that we were looking at his room temperatures, and some of the room temperatures are very cold, 16, 17 degrees, which he's quite happy about. The dining room, they don't go in there. I guess they're only going to go in there in summer. I just assume that everybody runs their heating like I do. So my heat pump at home has been running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since 2010.
But when you say that, that's not necessarily that it's pumping out heat. It's keeping the temperature at 21 degrees at that, or whatever your set point is for that time.
So our house has never fallen below 20. Well, sadly, about 23 now because my wife turned the thermostat up. But our house is a flat temperature all the time, 24 hours a day, cold days, warm days. Obviously, come the summer, it goes off. Of course, it would. So for about 6 months of the year, the heating is on 24/7, and it cost me a load of money. What a surprise! But it is the ultimate setting of how to get my system running. It's got oversized radiators. It's amazing. But if I could convince my wife that we only heated the house for short periods, or we didn't heat some of the rooms, we wouldn't have had to modify the system so much. So there's a sort of little bit of a new way of thinking, of crazy idea of why don't we ask the customer what they want? And then what we'll do is we'll provide them with a system like they have now, which performs like the system they have now. If they'd like to make an extra, they have another child, they want to now heat the back bedroom. Well, let's upgrade the radiator then.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge mindset change. I think from where we had the previous incentives around heat pumps under the renewable heat incentive. It was the kind of customer, as you described there, maybe keeping the house very warm, very leaky homes, a huge investment in the system. Therefore, they're wanting to see significant reductions in running costs, and how those systems are programmed and controlled all feed into that mentality. If we're going to start looking at the 1.7 million boilers that are going in every single year, when we're, from a heat pump industry perspective, we're standing on our soapbox because we've done 30,000 heat pumps, a record year for heat pumps last year. So if we're going to start getting into those 1.7 million boilers every year, do we need to start looking at the boiler industry and saying, right, how do we mimic what they've done whilst taking the customer on a journey to improvements? So if you could walk into somebody's house, I think you mentioned it before, high temperature heat pump systems. If we walked into somebody's house and said, we're not going to rip all your radiators out, we're not going to rip your hot water cylinder out, and we're going to fit you a heat pump that has the ability to run at a similar temperature to your boiler, and you can run it exactly as you do now. You're not going to see any great savings right now, but you will get this new system, a greener system in the long term, for the similar capital cost of a boiler going in.
It's an interesting idea. So essentially what you do is you go in, if I understand it right, we're going to go in and we're going to say to you, we're going to replace your boiler with a heat pump, which is similar temperature to what you got. We'd like you to continue running it how you did before. And what we can then do once we've got a bit of data back is say, maybe if you change this radiator or this room or whatever, or maybe the way you operate it, we can then offer you the chance to reduce your run cost. Yeah. So a continuous improvement.
Exactly. Look at it. So once it's in, if we see, I mean, one of the big challenges I think we've got is the amount of oversizing that we do during this journey. So when we do those calculations to determine what size radiators you need or what size hot water tank you need, it's all done on kind of visual inspections. There's no monitoring of existing performance to determine how many radiators you need upgraded, how big a hot water cylinder you need. It's all done based on an Excel-based calculation that was created by the MCS scheme. So if we were to say we're going to put this in, and we're going to have an open, honest conversation with the customer to say, we can't give you an exact performance running cost of this system. But what we can guarantee you is that the capital cost of the installation is going to be far less than if you did upgrade the whole place. And then we will monitor the performance and we will see which, if any of the rooms are struggling, and then we'll start to make periodic improvements to the heating system upgrading a radiator here, a radiator there, as the budget allows, as convenience allows.
Bizarrely, that's how you renovate your house. So when we bought our house, it was a wreck. So we renovated all of it. We were lucky that we could live somewhere else for a bit, and we renovated the whole thing and put a beautiful full new heating system in. But most people would rather go, oh, we're going to paint the lounge in 2 weeks' time. So while we do that, we'll change the rad. And we might do the dining room in August. We might change the rad there. There is an assumption from us, the Knowles, that you want to replace everything. And in new build, get it perfect. In deep retrofit, get it perfect. But actually, when you're working your way around painting the house room by room, you might be doing the kitchen next year. I'd never thought of it that way, but actually that's quite a clever way of doing it. And actually, weirdly, when I look at my house, we actually did do some bits in steps. So we did the cavity wall insulation after we painted. We put double glazing in later because we didn't have the money. So the house that I bought and the house I live in today are not the same thermal house. Actually, bizarrely, the heat loss has dropped by about 30% over the years. And we have actually changed a few of the radiators down in size. So we started with big ones, and then we've changed them as we decorated, and as we do it, we've sized them down. So no, it's a really interesting way of doing it. I'd never thought about that because our industry has always worked with people, bless them, who've got lots of money, who you say £15,000, they go, crack on, let's do all of it. But there's been enough work. There's always been enough work. There is now to keep those people busy. As you say, if you want to capture the boiler engineer who wants to get one of these things in for 3,000-4,000 quid, we need to trim away a few bits and make some things simple. So
we do need to get into that 1.7 million boilers. I mean, I was looking at the stats. I think it's 49% of those boilers go in a distressed purchase scenario. So if I'm in that moment where I've got no heating, I've got no hot water, and I need to make that decision, and I've got a guy down the road who can come and fit me a boiler, and that's going to be in them for the next 10, 15 years possibly. Or I can, or I look at a heat pump system, and then somebody comes around at a point in time where they can actually come around, do the assessment. Maybe I'm looking at 6 to 8 weeks possibly before I'm going to get the installation done. That isn't feasible. You're not going to do that. But if you're in a situation where you've got somebody that you can engage with and work with over time and say, look, we're going to come out today, we're going to replace your boiler with a heat pump, a high temperature heat pump if needs be, and then we're going to monitor the performance, and then we're going to start making those improvements over time. If you were willing to maybe forego an energy saving at that moment in time for long-term sustainability, if you were willing to go on that journey, then surely that's got to be an option that we start to consider.
Yeah, I mean, again, something that's all sort of come out of doing this bizarre project with my son is, so what I should have done is go to him, I've measured your average radiator temperature, and it's 55 degrees, 60 degrees. And you run it for 2 hours a day, what we'd like you to do is run it for 3 hours a day at 45 degrees. And then you get the same result and cheaper run cost. Because I had the data. You can go back to them and go, here's some advice. So you look at their data, you've got this high temperature heat pump in, you've put it in quickly, it's done. And you can go, we've now looked at your data, and you know what, don't run it for an hour a day, run it for longer but lower. And that will save you money. And they go, what, longer is cheaper? Go, yeah, only a little bit longer, but it gets the temperature down because the performance does drop pretty quick once you get up into the 60s. The run cost is quite high. But we could give them that data. But when everyone goes on about training, who needs training? Basically, all the old lags like me need dragging in a room and wrap across the knuckles with a ruler. And so you need to speak to the customers a little bit, find out what they want, and then use that incredible knowledge you have to slightly tailor it. Go, okay, we can do 2 hours a day, but let's call it 3 and a little bit colder, and that will save you some information, some run cost. It is weird that we go in with this beautifully designed system, and some of the guys out there really, really know what they're doing. Very, very clever systems, and perfectly balanced. Every room's the right temperature and so on, and then you don't get the order, and you go, why not? Go, well, Mrs. Miggins doesn't use the heating very much. And you go, oh, right. And do you know what?
More importantly, probably couldn't afford the quota that you've put in front of them as well.
And that's it. So it is quite a bit of I think that's what we need, is this sort of revolutionary thinking. It's not revolutionary. And you hit on something a little bit earlier about, should we be more like the boiler lads? You go, here's a business model. We're trudging on doing our poxy 50,000 units a year, essentially failing. And we are the worst in Europe at heat pumps, 20th in the league table of country in Europe. It's embarrassing how bad we are at it. And we refuse to go and look at the fellas who are flogging 1.3 million because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I would argue that maybe they might know something we don't. It's just an idea.
Yeah, and at least engage in that discussion, because I think we would both agree that if a customer has the budget to have a whole house upgrade of their system, that to achieve the lowest running cost, the lowest flow temperature, the lowest running cost, the highest efficiency, that would be the way.
Of course, it is. Yeah.
But should people be told they're not allowed to have a heat pump because they can only afford to do that in incremental stages?
I mean, can you imagine the scenario? You go, I think I want to buy a car. They go, well, the best car you can buy is an S-Class Mercedes. And you go, right, yeah, it's a good car. I haven't got enough money for an S-Class. You can't have a car.
No cars.
No cars at all. And you go, no other industry.
Am I right in saying you cannot have a car at all through fear that the car that you do buy, if it isn't as good, you're going to ruin cars for everybody.
Exactly. And it's just bizarre. The thing is, we have exactly the same in houses and heating systems. I've got customers who, when you tell them it's £20,000 for a heating system, they go, whatever, pocket change. I've got people who you say to them £2,000 and they go, I haven't got £2,000. I can't afford that. But we are, I think, are terrible as an industry at tailoring our proposition to the customer base. And actually, if we're honest about it, and I don't think a lot of people are, sit down and think about this. It's taken me a while to think about it. But because there's not enough of us installers, we can cherry pick the work. Yeah. So you kind of go, I only focus on the leafy parts of town.
Yeah, I'm only going to do the high-end installations.
Yeah, but
why would I get involved in this?
Yeah, exactly. And I do the same. I spend all the jobs that come into my office for design. They're all houses. I look at this and think, blimey, I don't know who lives here, but they're definitely not a plumber.
Yeah.
These guys have got a proper job. A financier or something. So you look at, they're all gorgeous houses, or new build, and then it's a different market. You don't get people coming along going, I'm really struggling with my mortgage. I paid 250 grand for this ramshackle, 100 meter square house, and I want to spend 10 grand on a heating system. Those people just go, they don't exist. So we've never had to think about it. And if you've spent your whole life working in these beautiful manor houses, the idea of trudging around doing 3-bedroom semis probably fills you with loathing, because you think, I've got a really, really good business.
So would you find, you think, no doubt if our listeners and the people watching, if they're looking at this going, well, I'll take one of those systems. I'll take one of those £1,500, £2,000 systems. I want one of those put in my house. And they ring up their local MCS installer, of which there is 900 to 1,500 MCS approved installers that are capable of doing this across the country. They're all very busy and all earning nice incomes. And they ring up and say, I'd like one of those £1,500 systems. Are they going to get told that what you're suggesting as an idea it will never work? But what
would you do? I'd be like, I'm really sorry, but I'm doing the guy who's got some money. I mean, you see this. There's excuses. I get people ringing me all the time. I've got microbore. I can't have a heat pump. Yeah, microbore's a little bit harder, and I've got 15 inquiries on my desk, and you've got microbore.
I'm not doing it.
Don't worry about it.
Well,
or you're too far away, or whatever. Why? You cannot criticize people who are very, very skilled at doing what they're doing. They're going, guys, we are flat out. And you're asking me to go and do this horrible system, which is really hard down the road, when I've got 10 other in the queue. I'm not going to do that. When there's 1,000 or 10,000 people putting them in, and you haven't got any work this month, you'll go, oh, microbore, you say? Yeah, we can do that. So it's basically weeding out the jobs. Any of the trades have the same problem. There's not enough people in any of the trades. So if you've got a particularly difficult job, or you're a particularly difficult customer, why would anyone pick you when there is a queue behind you?
And I suppose there is evidence out there within the existing heat pump installations. I mean, there's a measuring contest certainly within heat pump installers to say, I got this seasonal coefficient of performance, or I got this seasonal coefficient of performance. So I suppose is there enough? At the moment, I would imagine there's not enough information out there on these direct boiler replacements. We're not going to touch any part. Project Impossible, your son's house. There is not enough of those that have gone in to determine whether that is a poor installation or a good installation. And what would be the category for that? What would suggest this is a poor installation? Why? Because it's less efficient, even though the capital cost of the installation was less than the person who paid £13,000.
But and bizarrely, so I was pushing towards the dream installation at my son's house, which he thinks is the poor installation because he doesn't want to run it 24 hours a day. So for him, the dreadful old system that runs for 2 hours a day is amazing. For me, my wife would divorce me if I ran the heating for 2 hours a day. So the COP, and which it drives me nuts, as I mentioned earlier, the efficiency it's a ridiculous measure. What the first question is, how much do you want to spend on your heating? Our heating bill at home is something like £2,500 a year, which we can pay. My son wants to pay about 700. So what he's really asking is how much heat, how long can I run this blooming thing for 700 quid? He never mentions COP.
Really?
Really? That doesn't care. As we went back to cars, when I bought my car, I did not ask what the fuel consumption was. I didn't care. And you kind of go, oh, it's probably okay-ish. And there are people who are really, really into it. They're the guys who've got the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet of how much solar PV they've made for the last 10 years. Actually, they've been our customer base for the last 10 years. Really geeky people, massively into the technology. You see them on the forums. They drive me mad. They're constantly fiddling with their machine. But we're sort of running out of them. Now we've got to get people who've got like kids and got to get people to school in the morning and go, I just want to get up and have a shower. And it's warm and it doesn't cripple me financially and it works. And it's really weird because actually the people watching this will not be, that will answer this in a very odd way. But I always start the question, when did you last see your boiler? And most people go, it's in the kitchen somewhere. Haven't seen it for 2 years. Because you don't care about it. It just works. Yeah. Obviously, people watching this will go, well, I polish my boiler every Sunday morning because I'm really into heating. But we're weirdos.
But is that topic? So the topic of this show was how does a heat pump work and how much it will cost. So and there's a reason for that. It's because the members of our Energy Challenge group asked that question. Lots of people very interested in the heating. If you utilize kind of Google tools to see what is the most common thing searched around heat pump systems, it's how do they work. So logically, you would do a show on that, and you're going to get those kind of people. But I think your son is, I doubt he's ever Googled how does a heat pump work.
No.
Nor will he ever.
Doesn't care.
No.
He's just like, why didn't you just buy me a boiler?
Yeah.
I said, well, I had a sample heat pump I needed putting in somewhere.
So people, is the truth of the matter is, I mean, we could sit here and we could get a whiteboard out and we could draw a diagram and the refrigeration cycle of how a heat pump works. And if those people want to see that, they can go online and they can do that stuff.
Well,
but is it true
join me at Eastleigh College on my refrigeration course? It's a 2-year course.
Well, the colleges are available.
Apparently.
They just don't have Graham teaching them. But are we saying that if we answer that question, how does a heat pump work? Google it, because there's plenty of resources out there that will tell you how they work, but it's essentially a fridge operating reverse. And Graham could talk you through it in great deal. I'm sure you could do a YouTube video on it. How much do they cost? To me, is directly linked to this kind of question. It's there is an opportunity to say, what is your budget? And if your budget is the same as a boiler, then that will completely depend on how efficient your system is.
Yep.
What your running costs will be.
Yeah.
And how much upheaval, inconvenience, whatever it might be, in your home that you will actually face.
Yeah.
So the lower end of that budget, you will get a direct replacement for a boiler, and you will likely have similar, maybe slightly higher running costs.
Yeah, I mean, as a rule, if you go for the really cheap system, you don't change all your components, the run costs are going to be a bit higher. Maybe you can sort that out over time, but part of that, you're not going to get the super efficient system. I'll give you a really good example. The best systems you can get are systems, they call them open systems. So basically it runs the whole house as almost like a single room. So you get exactly the right amount of hot water to every radiator at the right time, and it's all perfect. And it's a process called balancing. I did a blog about it. And to balance a system beautifully and really well takes an extra day. You got to pay for that. To balance it quickly takes 10 minutes. So it's like anything, the fine tuning to get the very, very best out of your system costs a little bit more. So you would expect the higher end jobs are that way. It doesn't, as I said earlier, the very high prices don't always guarantee the best. But there's always rip-off merchants in every trade. But if you go, some of the installers, you've seen them in LinkedIn, I could name a few now, but I'm not going to. That those guys are going to do a really, really tip-top job. I've been to commission some in the bad old days, and you go, I don't know why I'm here. These guys have done such an amazing job. I turn a switch on and leave. Yeah. Others, you turn up, you've got to do everything. So, yes, I think that's a really good thing. If you, just like cars, if you buy an S-Class, they're going to give you a box of chocolates, probably a glass of champagne when you pick it up, and they're going to pull the cloth off it and so on. If you go and buy a Ford Fiesta, it'll probably be out the front, and they'll go, thanks for having that, and you might get a cup of tea. You get what you pay for to a certain extent. And hopefully the S-Class is slightly more comfortable than the Fiesta. I don't know. I don't own either. So I think that is a good way of looking at it. So if you wanted to do a more budget installation, a faster budget installation, a sort of quick replacement, very, very clearly explained that we're going to look at the system and then upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. And you know what? You might not want to take the advice. I say, change that radiator in the lounge and that's going to save you £100 a year. And you go, I don't care. You go, okay, that's fine. But at least you've got the data. Really clear data is the key.
And actually feeling that comfort in the home. So there is, from a regulatory perspective, there is a minimum, isn't there? Your system has to be designed to operate at 280% efficiency in order for you to access the £5,000 voucher.
But it's not measured.
It's not measured.
So you just make it up.
But it is a bare. But that is the case across even the upfront system design that we see at the moment. You have to have this room by room heat loss calculation done for each room in the property to be able to determine what size radiators you need in there. And then when you actually track all that back, it's Excel calculators or it's visual inspections of what I think is behind that wall, what I think is in that floor. Everything gets oversized all that way through on erring on the side of caution. So practically, how many radiators are we taking out of people's houses that actually would have been perfectly fine? What is the flow temperature of those systems when actually they could have, what we've designed it at, it runs far lower than that in practice?
Well, that I get that. You've got to remember, and bless MCS, I'm not their biggest fan, but they did solve a problem, which was pre-MCS. There wasn't... Some of us were doing calcs, but you didn't have to. Sling in whatever you had and hope like hell. And what MCS did, and if you look at how the maths is done, it's designed to slightly overcook everything, because really at its heart, it says, we won't leave you cold.
Yeah.
And they probably wouldn't dress it up there, but that's what MCS's motto it should be. We won't leave you cold. And you're right, because everything gets piled on, compounded on top of each other, it's possible that I've overestimated your heat loss in your room by 20, 30, 40%. Example, I say to you, is your wall cavity insulated? You say yes. And I'm like, I'm not really sure it is. So I'm going to tick no, just in case, because I haven't got any evidence. Well, I've just upped your heat loss, which means a bigger radiator, which means a bigger heat pump. It's a sort of weak example. It gives you the idea. We assume how much air leaks out of your room. So my 1930s house and your 2010 house, potentially leak at the same rate. Anyone who's ever been in a 1930s house knows that isn't true. But it doesn't matter. We still make those assumptions. So yes, there's oversizing to not leave you cold. I like the idea. You've got to have the right people to do it. My son is one of them, where you go, let us measure for a bit. You might be a bit uncomfortable for a while, but let us measure actually what's going on. And that's part of this Project Impossible. I'm actually going to go back and put the data back through and compare what the proper calculation and the EPC say compared to what it really does.
Well, is there a basic way of doing that? If a customer went to their boiler today and turned it down and said, I'm thinking about having a heat pump fitted. I'm going to turn my boiler down and I'm going to see how my system performs in the winter.
Yeah.
Is there a minimum temperature that you can turn it down to?
But I mean, try whatever you like. I mean, I often do that. I do a special offer every September, free heat pump trial for everyone. It takes 10 minutes to install. Go to your boiler, wind it down at 45 degrees and run it longer. So however many hours you run it now, run it longer, run it 50% longer. And are you warm enough? And if you go, I'm not warm enough, 45 degrees isn't enough. So give it 50. And wind it up until you find the bit where you're warm enough.
Could you actually do 40? Say you run it at 45 degrees and went, I'm warm enough in these rooms, but I'm not warm enough in this room.
Yeah, and then you go, probably going to need to change the radiator in that room. It's that hard, the maths.
All of which you could do without necessarily paying, hundreds of pounds a day to an MCS installer. If you decided by doing that, and I'm just going to upgrade that radiator and that radiator because I found on the coldest day of the year that I was struggling in those rooms, then by the time it gets to having a heat pump fitted, you've self-diagnosed what your temperature, your flow temperature needs to be.
Yeah, but don't do that because I won't make any money. It's much better to call me. Check in the post.
Unfortunately, Graham, honestly, I don't think the viewers of this show will be interested in making you the money. As much as it's crazy to believe.
But it is true.
This book is where
you could buy the book. Yeah, highly recommend. I could sign it and reduce its price. But essentially, yes. Why? I always say it to people. Why wouldn't you give it a whirl? You've heard all the horror stories online of, it's going to be cold and I can't wash up and the radiators are cold and, it's all the disaster. Get a pencil. That's the first thing I taught as a commissioning engineer. Mark on the knob where it was and then turn it down.
And have you done a blog or a video on how to turn down the temperature of your boiler? Because it is relatively straightward. There's a knob on the front.
Yeah,
there is some limitations. I should say
Yeah, I wouldn't go below about 40 degrees just because why bother? I don't know. Weirdly, I don't know much about boilers. I spend my whole time telling people they shouldn't use them. But 40, 45 degrees isn't going to do any harm.
It'd be interesting to know because I think on the boiler you don't necessarily get the number of degrees. You get these kind of level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there'll be something there.
There's a special place in hell for the people who designed that. They also did the work in the fridge.
Yeah,
the fridge. I'm a fridge engineer. I don't know if 1 or 7 is
1 to 5 oximeters.
No idea. And why they couldn't write a temperature on, too expensive. It's that extra digit.
Or do you need to know? That's the thing. Do you need to know what your temperature boiler's at? You just because again. In this conversation, people are going to know, but I think we talked about it the other week, looking at the car. When you get into the car and you just go, I'm just going to move this dial up to here. And you go, that's how it works. And no. You need a very complex set of controls. And this actually goes to our next question. We've got a question from Hannah up in Edinburgh. Would you play that for us, Joe?
Hi, my name's Hannah and I live in Edinburgh. We're interested in getting a heat pump so that we can reduce our carbon emissions and minimise our climate impact. My question's around control. How do you control heat pumps? I've heard that you need to use a system differently to a gas boiler and optimise operation to achieve the advertised efficiencies.
Okay, that's a really good question. So first thing is, can you imagine anyone asking that question on a boiler? No. How do you control it? Turn up the hive and it gets hot and then turn it off. That's it. Yeah. But us idiots have got on and discussed this at length. So there are a number of ways of controlling it. So let's start at the easiest to understand, but not the cheapest. If your heat pump is set up to run at the same temperature as a boiler, you literally do what you did in your boiler. So, and I actually encourage people to keep their old thermostat, because it works. So you go, right, what did you used to do? You used to heat it for 2 hours a day and at 60 degrees C and carry on. You can do that. That is possible. It's not the best way, but it will work. What your installer should then be advising you is, okay, that is possible to do, but let's try and bring the temperature of the water down because you save significant amount of money as you pull temperature down. and run it longer. So that's the next stage. You go, okay, could you tune my heat pump down a little bit? They all have fiendishly difficult to use controllers. It's the law, the first law of heat pumpery. Controls must be unusable. I have never seen a decent heat pump controller, not one. It's just impossible to do. I think what happens is if you're a controls engineer and you're not very good, you end up in heat pumps.
Yeah.
I'm going to get shot for
Otherwise, you'd be working in boilers.
Otherwise, you'd be working in... But boilers aren't much better. The boiler at least got a knob on the front. But, it'd be nice if it had a knob on the front. It went hotter, colder, or, a slidey wheel. But it hasn't. It will be done with some horribly torturous programming. And there will be a YouTube video. But your installer could say to you, I'll do a little video of how to do it. So after you've run it for a week, why don't we knock the temperature down 10 degrees and extend the time a little bit longer? So from the 2 hours to the 3 hours to the 4 hours. If you're one of those people who already runs your heating pretty much 24/7, like I do, what they then do is they can tailor your system exactly to what you want. Example. When it's snowing outside, my radiators might want to be 45, 50 degrees C. When it's a day like today where it's sort of 13, 14, 15 degrees outside, you don't need them that hot. So what you do is you allow the temperature of the water to fall. And they call this weather compensation. Every single heat pump I've ever seen has this inside. It's torturously difficult to program. It would be, but your installer will set that up for you. And you can look online and tweak it. You basically vary the curves a little bit.
But when you say you can do all that stuff,
yes.
But so I'm assuming, obviously, for years with boiler installations, we've been doing that same thing. People have been. But then, would the argument be from a heat pump installer that is doing these things properly that they are now rectifying the issues that have been created by the boiler industry by putting things like this weather compensation into system? So weather compensation, I'm right in saying it is good to have it. You should have it. We should be doing this. Just in the same way with boilers for years, we should have been setting them to be able to condensate. Condense.
Yes, I mean the thing is with a boiler, it doesn't, as far as I know, I'm not an expert. It doesn't make a massive amount of difference to the consumption. The temperature doesn't change. So if you ran it on a warm day like today at 65 degree radiators, they'll come on for a short period of time and go off.
Okay.
Right, they cycle on and off, and you don't really notice, and it just happens. If you weather compensated them so that they were only running at 35 degrees today, the boiler would run much, 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 much longer. But I don't know how much saving you'd make if you did that. It's not my specialist subject. On a heat pump, I know that is very beneficial. You can halve your run cost from, if you're running at 60 all day, every day, and you can bring it down to sort of 30, 35. There's an enormous saving in energy because heat pumps are great at lower temperatures. So you should be using weather compensation. And a lot of people ask, how do I know if I am? I've got this system, I paid 20 grand for it, I don't know if I've got it. Easy. Go and fill the rads. On a really cold day, they should be hot. Like good and hot, in the sense that when you touch them, they're on. Some, depending on the system, sometimes they will be really warm, but you should be able to feel and go, that is definitely on, and it's lovely and warm. On a day like today, where it's 13 degrees outside, the radiators, you touch them and you go, well, they're on, but they're a bit tepid. That's weather comp. That is good.
And are we talking what is the difference here? So we've got. So in this question, we're asking, how do you control a heat pump? Practically, and maybe we're doing what heat pump installers have been guilty of for years, we're asking, does that question relate to the weather compensation, the controls within the heat pump? Or do you think that question could relate to, can I use a Nest or a Hive? So,
I mean, the real answer, how do I control a heat pump? Which thermostat would you like to buy? Which one do you like?
Am I right in saying you can use Nest and Hive with a Samsung heat pump as an example, or any of that? But the preference is, do not fit that. Use the manufacturer's controller. But even with a Nest or a Hive, would you still get weather compensation within the heat pump?
Yeah. So this is where we're doing exactly what our industry does terribly. Can I use a Nest? Yeah, stick it on. It's absolutely fine.
Because that'll be that question. How do you control the heat pump?
Whatever one you want. You choose. I actually say to all of the installers I've ever trained, let the customer go and buy the stat. Because if they buy some weird thermostat, you don't want to be supporting it. You bought it, you learn how to use it, but when you go up, you get heating, and when you go down, you don't get heating. Done. that will work, and the heat pump installer programs into the machine itself the curve and how the radiators change with temperature. You shouldn't worry about that. They'll get it pretty close and done. It won't be as good as it could possibly be, but it'll be okay. And they tend to do it a little bit on the high side just to make sure you get warm. Right. Once you start using the manufacturer's controllers, there's a second level. So what happens is, if you imagine you've gone to your manufacturer's controller in your lounge and you set 21 degrees, as the temperature in the room closes in on 21 degrees, because it's wired to the heat pump, says to the heat pump, right, throttle back a bit, lads. Everything's going to be okay. So you get a kind of second level of control built in. And it is the better way of doing it, but it has a number of problems. The first one is there's only one controller. Now, you might want one controller upstairs, one controller downstairs. You might want a controller in every room. Well, you can't do that with a heat pump. You've only really got one. So that's the first issue. And the second one is that the manufacturer's controller is horribly difficult to drive. Okay. They've never seen a Nest. That's the special fellas who write the software. They're not allowed out the room they live in, and they've never seen a Nest. If the controller looked like a Nest and you went hotter and colder and so on, I'd go use that every time. But as a rule, I always say to people, unless you're a bit geeky and you're really into controls, you probably won't like the manufacturer's controller very much. It's got 1,000 symbols on the front, none of which mean anything. Not even to me. You have to look in a book and go, what does that Christmas tree mean? And again, I think these people have never been in a car. I get in my car, you could get in my car, and you'd know that the arrow pointing down means I get warm feet, and the arrow pointing up means it does the windscreen. And there's no training manual. But on a heat pump, they go, no, what's the weirdest symbol I can put in this so that no one knows? And it kept me in a job for 32 years, answering, what does the Christmas tree mean? Yeah. Go, that's the outdoor temperature. Everyone, obviously. And they go, why doesn't it say outdoor temperature? Go, you couldn't write it. No. That would be insane. So Nest are a million miles away in the sort of feely touchiness of their controller. They are miles ahead of literally everybody in heat pumps. So I would say, if you're not a geeky, techie person, choose a nice stat that you like. Stick that on, and that's your interface with your heating, just like now.
And again, you can. So, Hannah, you could have the control that you want. You could have the Nest. Absolutely. But there is still the potential that when you phone up a local MCS installer, be it the fact that there's so few and they can pick these jobs, they might turn around and go, if that's what you want, just like you don't want to upgrade your radiators, you don't want to upgrade your hot water cylinder, then unfortunately you will not be having a heat pump from me. Good day.
Which is as sensible as saying, what, you say you want the red Mercedes S-Class? Sorry, not possible. You're not allowed a car.
Well, is that the kind of, you're getting into that world of the kind of Ferrari, you can only have a Ferrari if you have it in this particular way. If you decide you're going to want a pink Ferrari, they just won't sell you one because...
Yes, but we need to remember that we don't work in Ferrari land. No. We're in heat pumps.
Just purely heat pumps.
So... if you say to the customer, you can have a Nest or a Hive or whatever you want, there are a couple that aren't, there are very few that aren't compatible. But as a general rule, they are. It is not going to be the very best of systems. There are some amazing optimization systems you can buy, which take that control away a little bit from you, but really tune the system. I work with a couple of them, and you get the best of the best.
But this is, let's look at that, because we talked about it before. What is the best system? And we talked about efficiency, and then but best in capital cost and everything like that. So if we're talking about the best control system, again, we're linking it back to optimization and efficiency. But when my brother had a heat pump fitted, and the standard process, have a Samsung controller fitted in your home, get rid of the Nest. To him, the best system was the one that meant that his wife could turn on the heat pump when he was in the pub on a Sunday and him not get bothered.
Yeah.
So I was saying to, you should have the Samsung controller, you should do all this stuff. And he said, that isn't the best for me. The best for me is the system that has been in for the last 5 or 6 years, the Nest controller. It will, his wife knows how to control it. And when he goes out for his couple of beers on a Sunday, he's not going to get a phone call giving him any grief.
I think the user interface is so important and utterly missed in heat pumps. It just isn't a subject. So Nest, you got to be, anyone can drive a Nest. It even changes colour. I am an enormous fan of the Honeywell mechanical wall stat. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You just go click, click. There's no one has ever rung me and said, "Can you explain how this works?" That way colder, that way till it clicks. It's on now. Done.
And you can. So there is no technical reason that you couldn't have a simple dial style thermostat with a heat pump system. But you are forgoing an element of efficiency.
Yes, I actually had possibly the world's best heat pump in my house driven off 2 mechanical wall stats. That was it. And the machine did all the heavy lifting and the clever calculations. But all that switch on the wall, that thermostat, all that does on every heating system under the sun is says go or stop. That's it. It's just an on off. You could have a light switch and go on heating, off heating. So that is all that thing is doing. And it's telling the heat pump, right now you activate your clever software and so on and do all the jiggery pokery. And I think people like that. I mean, for instance, I rang my wife on the way here and I said, it annoys me, for instance, that in our house, if the sun's out, the house gets very warm very quickly. And our heat pump's a little bit slow at seeing that. And I said to her, it's a lovely sunny day. Can you turn the heat pump off? She goes, I don't know how to do that. No. And she goes, you'll be back tomorrow. You can do it. I said, no, but it's a whole day where, not a whole day, but a couple of hours, it will shovel heat into the building and then go, oh, blimey, it's quite warm in the lounge now. It can't predict that that's going to happen, whereas you can. Mm-hmm. If you had a Nest, you'd just go, oh, yeah, or a mechanical wall set, down it goes.
Just make it nice and simple.
I've got a horribly complicated app. And it's one of the best apps I've ever seen.
I remember you telling me this.
We have a controller, which isn't obvious, but a simple wiggly dial works. So all that's doing is stop and go. So we actually use it as an over temperature thermostat. So it stops the house getting too hot. It doesn't. Essentially the system's running all the time. But if the sun does come out, like today, and the room gets to 21, it goes, okay, that's us done. Let's get this thing turned off.
Well, that's good. So we've established that you can have a heat pump fitted, assuming you can find an installer to do so, within budget, within a similar cost to that of a boiler. You can, if you have the money to do so and the will to do so, upgrade everything in your home, or you can do it without. We have, probably for a show for another day, but we have got to address this fact that 80% of the gas boilers in the UK are combi boilers. Yeah. So therefore they don't have space for hot water cylinder. So I think maybe there's a challenge there for another day.
It's a discussion over dinner about that shoe cupboard that you've had for the last 20 years. I'm afraid it's going.
You lose your shoe cupboard. But then there's we were discussing with Sunamp ways of maybe having you've got the heat pump outside. Could you have some kind of externally mounted box to act as your hot water system?
Yeah.
But I think maybe that one's for another day. We do have one final question that's come in from Tony.
Hi Heatio, this is Tony Jones here from Hastings in East Sussex. My question is, can a heat pump be used for heating as well as cooling? I look forward to your response.
Brilliant. How long have we got?
We've got exactly 10 minutes left, so I thought it was a good one to end on.
So the answer is yes, absolutely. Every single heat pump under the sun is capable of cooling and heating. Think about your fridge, right? If you stand around the back where I stand, it heats. If you stand around the front, it cools. Okay, so we have a valve inside. I did a blog about this. We have a valve inside which essentially will reverse those two positions. It's called a four-way valve. If you want to learn about it, go on LinkedIn and I explain all. But essentially, it is possible to get your machine to cool easily. Flick of a switch, press a button and so on. That's easy. So now I have a machine which is sucking heat out of the house, so it's cooling your water and throwing the heat into the garden. So in the summertime, I can cool the house. But think about this, it's very apt actually. This is why we had the beers here. But if you pull one of these out of the fridge and you stick it on a table like this, you'll see that very quickly you get condensation on the glass and you get a little puddle of water underneath your bottle of water because it's cold. And that's bottle of beer might be at 5, 6, 7 degrees centigrade. So if I cool the water in your radiators to the same temperature that beer was, I am now going to get condensation on your radiators. Which is fine, is you just have to put towels underneath them and collect all that condensation. The condensation comes out the air. So the issue is, can I do it? Yes. Is it sensible? Not really. Because you'd need a little drip tray under all your radiators to collect all the water and run a little drain outside. You have to insulate all your pipework because your pipework would also get sweaty as well. And if there's any gaps, the air finds it. So you get little. It's quite common in offices, like you saw in the video there. You see lines down the roof where there's condensation dripped in a line along the roof. So if you want to do cooling as well as heating, tell the installer on day one. Right, let them know. It's incredibly difficult to retrofit after you've bought everything, because what we do is we put in radiators which are fan assisted, like air conditioning units, and they have a little drain in them, and the fan allows the thing to provide enough cooling, blows lovely cold air about. Think about this just as a sort of lasting end thing to this conversation. Cold air drops, so you got your radiator, you've got the towels underneath it, everything's good, you flick the machine into cooling, and it does a lovely job of, instead of the air going up through the radiator and up into the room and circulating, it drops onto the floor. So you have to lie on the floor to get cold, and it's boiling hot at the top.
And hence why we put cassette units in the ceiling in normal.
And with a fan, you can do anything. So if you want to cool as well, have a look at a system which is fan assisted, and tell them day one, because it's heartbreaking. You've just had this beautiful new radiator put in, you've run it for 6 months, it gets to August, you go, lovely to cool in this thing. The guy's got to rip the house apart to insulate everything. Then you're going to rip that beautiful new radiator off, throw it in the skip, and put a little fan assisted radiator in, which can heat and cool, and you just spent another £1,000.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It can be done. And practically how possible it is in as a retrofit installation. Yeah. It doesn't attract the grant, though, I'm right in saying.
It now does. Oh, okay. It's not a problem. And the one last thing is, people go, I've got underfloor heating. Go, well, think about that. That's amazing. So you get nice wet floors, and you have to lie on the wet floor because you get this beautiful blanket of cold air on the floor. So you need to stir. Cooling, you have to stir the air about.
And practically then, would you say going for kind of cassette units would be more traditional?
They'd have ducted units up in the loft, and also be very, very careful. Really, really think about what rooms do you really need cooling in. In our house, if it's 30 degrees in our house, we're on the patio. Yeah. So we might want to cool the bedroom, but do you really need to cool the lounge so you can watch EastEnders? So it's quite expensive to buy a fan coil system. Everyone goes, I want one in every room. You go, okay, they're £1,000 each.
Turns out I don't.
And you go, actually, I don't. Yeah, turns out the kids can fry, and you might put one or two in. So but it's like anything. Get your wish list into your installer early. Ask them what they can do. Some of them, understandably, might look at you and go, now you're a trouble homeowner. I've got 15 other people I want to go and see. So be a little gentle, and probably the best advice I can give to all homeowners is, please, if you're going to do a mountain of research, don't tell the installer you've done that when he arrives or she arrives. It terrifies them when you go, I've read every book under the sun and I'm an expert on thermodynamics. I would go, I tell you what, I'm not working for you. I'm out of here. There's 15 other people. I sit next to an installer in my office. We share an office, and he hears some of these conversations. He goes, don't send me that one. Forget it. Yeah. The guy's done everything. So, by all means, research it, but trust the person you're buying from. When I go to Mercedes and buy my S-Class, I trust Mercedes know what they're doing. And if you don't trust them, don't give them the money.
Well, I think this is what it comes down to now. I mean, we've talked a lot about how, you can reduce the capital cost of installations. You can run systems at higher temperatures. You can make periodic upgrades over time. You can use whatever controls you want. But I think we're gonna set a little bit of a challenge. I think. Mm-hmm. Proof is in the pudding. So I think between now and the next time we get together, we will. So Heatio have recently gained their micro generation accreditation. So we are now certified to install heat pump systems. We will do a high temperature installation or a heat pump system that has been designed at high temperature. Doesn't necessarily mean the heat pump has to, and we will monitor it. And we will, and you've done Project Impossible. I don't think it's not necessarily a high temperature heat pump, but it's a heat pump that's operating at the upper echelons.
Well, no, I mean I didn't have a high temperature heat pump lying around, so I've got an 8-year-old Samsung Generation 5, the oldest one in the world. It's a prototype, and it's the only unit I had lying around. So it's a 52-degree unit running on all existing pipework, all existing radiators, the whole lot. So on paper, it won't do the job.
Well, I tell you what we'll do then. We'll go out to our Energy Challenge Group members, and we will ask somebody who would be willing to be part of that, and we will utilize the boiler upgrade scheme.
Yeah.
We'll provide the labour. We'll do that work, and we'll see whether we can prove that is a method to go down. And I truly believe if we can get to that point where we're able to show installers, we're able to show consumers that this is possible, and start to engage with wider audience of heating engineers and electricians to get involved in this industry, we can really start to take a chunk out of that 1.7 million boilers. And I think a good start. I mean, people who are interested in consumers who are interested in having heat pump systems, but this book is still available online.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're really sad and you can't sleep, there is a second one.
Oh, there's the second one.
I have.
That he's brought with him.
I can't get rid of them. And this one is 50 things that heating professionals need to know about heat pumps. So this is more how the system goes together. I mean, if you want to know what a low loss header is and how it works, it's in. But this
is. I mean, you may be a homeowner that would read this and it would give the header. But I think the benefit of that book, I would encourage every gas safe registered heating engineer in the country to download that to buy that because if they do, and we can start showing that heat pumps aren't that scary. They can go in this method, and we need consumers to be on that journey as well. Then I can't imagine I mean, you're probably going to get lynched when we walk out of here anyway by heat pump installers. But I think, so I doubt they're going to be reading your book. But
I can see from some of the work I've turned on, many of them have not read that.
So there's a few that can benefit from it. But I think maybe that's it. We need to demonstrate this. We need to demonstrate a low cost installation that has not had the upgrades with a high temperature system and a route to sustainability over time, reducing those running temperatures. Over time.
On LinkedIn every few weeks there's an upgrade about Project Impossible. This idea, this ridiculous idea. I've been very well supported with metering companies and so on. So I've got real data. And that's the big difference. You get some really valid opinions on forums and so on. But I would always ask, what have you measured?
Yeah. Have you done it this way? And what is the problem?
And that's the problem, is that anyone can go on a forum and go, I don't think that's a good idea. Or my uncle's best man's brother knows a bloke who did that. And you go, really? Well, here's the figures. And we actually are in the process of actually uploading the data into LinkedIn so you can see it.
Fantastic.
It's not just me making it up. To prove, I mean, when I first started my distribution company years ago, we had the very first 2 Samsung air source heat pumps in the world. I put one in, my co-director put one in. I put mine on a single pipe heating system. It didn't work. He put his in on microbore, didn't change a single rad, and it was all right as long as it didn't get cold outside. Once it got cold, we did the maths. I said, you're going to be cold in these rooms. And he was. So we've proved the point. It can work. But we always said, when people said, can I do this crazy idea? I have tried it and it is bloody awful. Yeah. As long as you kind of write a disclaimer that you're happy to be cold, that's fine. So, and that is the key thing I think our industry's got to learn and the consumer's got to learn. It is your house. Do whatever you like. Yeah. As long as you agree it with your installer, you can have anything you like.
That's it. It's not about. It's as long as everybody is informed and making that decision correctly. Then
exactly.
But you can't. I don't think it's right that we stop people from going on that journey just because they don't have the funds to do it all in.
No,
I think that's the point of it, isn't it? But we'll we'll see the progress from Project Impossible.
Yeah.
We will do a high temperature trial. We'll start looking at some of the new heat pumps that are on the.
Are you only doing that in like June, July, August, and then cutting it off in September?
No, I'm gonna. I want to see how this thing performs. I want that phone call on Christmas Day. No, I think we do. We need to we need to demonstrate that.
Well, that's the nice thing with the weather in this country is you do get a gentle run in. So if things aren't good, it's very, very easy to install. In this time of year, we're now currently nearly in May. You get 4 months of no problem, and then once you get into September, that's where it weeds out the problems. So it's good because you get a gentle feed in, and you can see with your meters. You think I can already see the problems. We can be jumping in, going, this lounge is an issue. This temperature is not enough. The run cost is going to go wild. I think that's the key.
But if everybody did, as you said, turn the boiler temperature down, see that for a winter, and then go again next year.
Yeah.
But I think it's been really good. That hopefully everybody's enjoyed the show. Hopefully we will have people watching and listening. So hopefully.
And I'll look forward to some trolling.
I was going to say, trolling and some book sales. Hopefully,
hopefully in greater book sales and less trolling. But
we are on across all social media channels. So we're on Instagram, on Facebook, and you can follow us on LinkedIn as well for maybe the professionals out there. Graham is also quite prolific on LinkedIn, as he's mentioned. So and follow us for more shows in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Thanks. Bye.